Thank you, Madam Chair. And I first thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. And I also thank you for bringing in Director of Prisons, Director Carvajal, because I think that your swift response to many of us who requested that his presence be here. And I appreciate your response to that, Madam Chair. And we're grateful for that. And I welcome Director Carvajal as well. Thank you for your service, sir. We're glad to have you here today. The Federal Bureau of Prisons is tasked with protecting society by confining offenders in the controlled environments of prisons and community-based facilities. BOP's duty is not merely to provide housing, food, and security for federal inmates, but also to help inmates become law-abiding citizens upon release. All Americans have an interest in BOP's mission because the vast majority of federal inmates, well above 90%, will someday be released into our communities regardless of our efforts to reduce recidivism. BOP's job is not an easy task, and it has only become more complicated due to COVID-19. In response to COVID-19, BOP undertook a number of steps to safeguard the health, safety of inmates, Bureau of Prison staff, and the public. BOP prioritized inmates from home confinement who did not pose a significant risk to the public, restricted the number of visitors, and limited the movement of inmates among detention facilities. These are reasonable measures, but my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to go even further. They've tried to use COVID-19 as a reason to let more convicted criminals back onto our streets. They even wrote Attorney General William Barr urging him to, quote, use every tool at his disposal to release as many prisoners as possible, close quote. They even passed legislation in the House that would pay states to release inmates in state prisons and local jails. Think about that. My colleagues across the aisle want to use our tax dollars to incentivize states to put more convicted criminals on the streets earlier. The consequence of these actions have deadly real-world results, as we have unfortunately seen. In March of 2021, Eric Reinbold was released from BOP custody after being granted compassionate release based on COVID vulnerability. By July, just 4 months later, Reinbold was accused and charged with murdering his wife. And just a few weeks ago in Oregon, Clifford Updegrove was charged with first-degree robbery, first-degree theft, and felony fleeing and unlawful use of a weapon. Updegrove had been granted compassionate release for COVID-related reasons the previous year. In spite of these and numerous crimes that have been committed by inmates released early, my colleagues across the aisle are calling for more inmates to be released regardless of their crime or prison sentence. Democrats on this committee want to open the jails and defund the police. They're turning a public health crisis into a public safety crisis as well. I tell you, Director Carvajal, to please pass on our appreciation to your officers and employees. They have a tough job, and I want them to know they have our support. To that end, I understand that many BOP officers have voiced concern over the Biden vaccine mandate. I strongly oppose any efforts to mandate COVID-19 vaccines and have introduced legislation to prevent federal agencies from imposing COVID-19 vaccine mandates. I look forward to hearings from Director Carvajal today. And I also request that, Madam Chair, that we soon have the DC Director of the U.S. Marshal's Office in for a hearing as well. I think some of the evidence that came out of last week's hearing would do well for both sides of the aisle to hear from the Marshal's Office. And I appreciate you again bringing in Director Carvajal. It's good to have him here. And I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member for his statement. I acknowledge at this time the service of our chairman, Mr. Nadler, and the service of our ranking member, Mr. Jordan, and thank them for their leadership of this committee. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses or witness, and that is Michael Carvajal, who is the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He began his career with the Bureau of Prisons in 1992 as a correctional officer at the Federal Correctional Institute, Three Rivers, Texas. He is, in essence, a committed, dedicated servant to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He served in position of leadership in Texas, Kansas, Louisiana, before becoming the regional director of Northeast Region in 2016. Mr. Carvajal became the assistant director for the Correctional Programs Division in 2018 and held that position until he was appointed director in 2020 in the last administration. Let me again take note of his service and as well the many corrections officers that I've had and staff the privilege of meeting throughout the system. As I indicated, our task here is to provide a reform and restoration and continued improvement on the institution of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We welcome you, Mr. Carvajal, Director Carvajal, and we thank you for your participation. I'll begin by swearing in our witness. I ask our witness to turn on your audio and make sure that I can see your face and raise your right hand while I administer the oath. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Let the record show the witness answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within the time frame, there is a timing light on your screen. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals that your 5 minutes have expired. I now recognize Director